Hey guys, what's up? So today on stream, we did a champ tier list. I actually had a lot of fun just rating all of the champions based on various factors, but mostly revolving around like competitive nature. While chatting about you guys and kind of like reminiscing about some of the older versions of the game as well. So we're gonna jump into that real quick first. If you guys like this kind of thing, let me know if you have any other ideas for these kinds of tier lists that we can do. I think there's just a lot of fun to be had with them. Like there's a lot of like meme style like tier lists that I expect will just be like complete jokes. But I wanted to start with something pretty vanilla. I think it's a good kind of content that a lot of you guys will enjoy, and I honestly probably should have started doing a while ago. And the last thing is we have to clearly define how this tier list is going to work. This is going to be a tier list ranking cards by competitive viability primarily, but there's going to be a lot of additional factors taken into that. So we're going to be rating champions by how important they are to the deck. For example, champions that kind of get carried by the deck that they would fit in end up ranking a little bit lower, and champions that end up carrying an otherwise unplayable deck end up ranking a little bit higher. We're also going to give bonus points for flexibility, being able to be used in at least more than one deck, which is in Runeterra standards for champions that's at least flexible. And we're taking past metas into account too, but not super old ones, like not pre-beta or not beta or anything like that. And we're not going to be taking into account older versions of changed cards for that. So while some decks are very powerful, this is more of a rating of like the champions themselves. So even though if champions belong in like common powerful decks, I might rate them a little bit lower if they just don't have flexibility. Now that we have that out of the way, let's see how this tier list ends up. I'm going to start with a champ tier list. I think flexibility, viability, and design are kind of like the big three for me. That's kind of what I want to base this off of. So we're just starting with Azir. So Azir is pretty solid. He's pretty simple, and I think he's well translated. I don't think there's anything wrong with this champion. It is a little bit limited in terms of use, but in terms of competitive viability, it's pretty solid. And I do like what he does as a champion, right? I'm very happy with Azir being A tier. Sorry, did I say S tier? Azir being A tier, A for Azir, a super obvious choice. We will get to Irelia later. When that happens. Draven, I'm incredibly happy with Draven personally, and this is where the the list it will be will have some amount of subjective territory. Personally, Draven for me is going to be literally S tier. Draven is an amazing champion. His competitive power level has been reliably high, not just in this meta but in the past. He's right on the mark for like good champion design. He's a solid standalone. You can build him in different ways. You have ways of being able to flexibly build around like discard packages. The 0 mana spell triggers are great with like stuff like Fizz and stuff like Auction's grappling hook. There's just a lot of uniqueness that Draven brings to the table, and his biggest fan interaction, like the fact that he's got like the 1 mana biggest fan, is a really large part of that. Like he kind of has like a dedicated couple of cards built around him. Ezreal is very interesting. I love Ezreal's design. I'm a big fan of how he's impacted the game. He is a very powerful champion and always has been. He's super powerful. I'm gonna quite happily put Ezreal in A tier, although he will be kind of higher. Left is higher, right? It's pretty close, like top of A tier. Ezreal's super well designed. Ezreal might actually be the most reliably competitively viable champion in the entire game. If you go back through every single patch, I think Ezreal has spent like the longest amount of time being competitive. Retroactively, I do think I have to bump Azir down to B. Like in thinking more about it, there will actually be a lot of like A and S tier designs. I'm just gonna do this now, so like I don't later. But there's gonna be too many things. I do like Azir. He's solid, but just not quite an A, right? He's good. He only fits into a couple of different decks, but I need to smoothen this out a little bit preemptively. Fiora, this is the easiest S of my life. If we're going by design and flavor and what it brings to the table, she hasn't been the most competitive out of these. No way. I will say I'm very biased here. F for Fiora. Fiora's objectively much closer to an A. She does really unique deck builds, and she has seen multiple competitive decks in the past. I think I'm actually putting her in A. In terms of like comparing her with Draven, I think the design of Fiora is really unique, and I like that it exists. She's not going to be as reliably competitive, but she will interact with the game in like probably one of the most unique ways possible. She's like Ezreal, where she single-handedly allows for entire archetypes to exist. And she was good in Fiora back when she was a 3-3. She's well designed but hateable. Yeah, I mean, just wait until you guys see where I put Lee Sin. Speaking of which, let's figure out where we're putting Irelia here. And here's the thing, guys. You guys aren't gonna like me for doing this. I would put Irelia in A tier. I think Irelia's so first of all, obviously she's competitively super solid. I think her design is really sweet. Obviously, she's very hateable because she's a little nuts and way too powerful at doing certain things, but she is insane in a specific deck. She's not flexible. She isn't flexible, but I'm valuing flexibility like a little bit lower. That's like a tiebreaker for me. The thing about Irelia's design is that she single-handedly is what creates the interesting play patterns that so many players love about that deck. Her you know, spamming the blades every single turn, the whole like swapping mechanic during combat is really cool, and she's super competitive. She loses a little bit of points when it comes to flexibility, but overall, so when I say flexibility, I mean like competitive flexibility, right? And Azir currently has the same amount of competitive flexibility as Irelia, right? Like you can technically run like less terrible decks with Azir, but in terms of like cohesive decks that make sense, these both basically have one deck right now, like 1.5 if you really want to push it. All right, Calista, I'm going to straight up dunk in D tier. I think Calista is a poo-poo champion. In terms of her viability, Calista has almost never been like a mainstay of any sort of competitive deck. She has been ran in like 2 decks for very short periods of times for very specific reasons, like as a counter to a specific meta. She's never really been good on her own. Her design isn't really compelling towards any sort of build around, and it's really flawed in terms of like being able to find a home in a deck. I think Calista, I was hesitating when I was taking my sip of water just now. I almost wanted to put her straight up in F tier, but I will say there are other champions that I'm saving F tier for. Katarina, God, we're really getting into this. You know, I'm sure some of you guys like Katarina. Katarina for me is gonna be the same. It's gonna be a D tier, for sure. Yeah, Katarina is. I'm not a big. So obviously she's been basically the same power level of Calista. Well, she's been even weaker. Katarina has seen like basically one deck one time as a one of in a card pool before we had some other forms of rallies. Now that you guys are mentioning it, I think I actually will have to move her to F. Like the more I think about Katarina, the worse she gets. This card is just like on a competitive level, she's terrible. She doesn't do anything interesting with deck builds. The only interesting thing about her is she just draws you cards. And I know like some people have fun with the idea of attacking over and over again. The promise of being able to like rally 4 times in a turn is kind of cute, but there are already ways in the game to do that you have to jump through very significantly less hoops for. Leblanc is a close one. She's obviously, she's found a competitive spot in, 2 decks, Ashe decks and like Sivir style decks. She's definitely makes a lot more sense now that Reputation has more support. And she loses some points on flexibility. In terms of her overall design and competitiveness, she's an easy C tier for me. LeBlanc is kind of like the definition of C tier. She has like a power level that's probably closer to B tier, but I'm personally, in terms of like the champion's design, in terms of how it affects deck building, I would bump her down to C personally. Although she's probably like the top of C, guys. Don't worry. Lissandra. So Lissandra is a really interesting champion. I do like the kind of dichotomy of use, the ability to have her being like played as a watcher thing in control decks, or being played for the thralls in some of the like Talia Thrall style decks. She's really unique. Like we were talking about how Irelia and Ezreal and Fiora give you unique ways to play. Lissandra straight up gives you 2 different unique ways to play that kind of couldn't exist without Lissandra. And she does so by providing a lot of unique mechanics. I'm a pretty big fan of Lissandra. She is probably going to be on the low side of A for me. I could actually see her being closer to high B. I think I'll go for the low side of A for now, and we'll see if that needs to get bumped down for later. Because I mean, usually for those of you guys who have ever like done tier lists or seen these kinds of tier lists, sometimes like in the first like 10 or 20 entries, I might have to readjust some things to kind of like set standards for what the lists are, right? All right, we got Lulu. Lulu is actually pretty competitive right now. She is pretty good in certain decks. In terms of how she affects deck building, I'm actually fine with her. She's solid, and I think I would put her in B tier. Probably a little bit higher than Azir, actually, unless we're going by like the very, very current meta of just like Azir Irelia being dominant. She's like pretty close to, yeah, like a bit ahead of Azir in my opinion. I think Lulu is actually pretty low key. I know a lot of you guys like Azir, but they're both like solid B tier options. I think that in terms of the competitive Lulu style decks right now, they're actually pretty underrated. She's probably like weaker in those decks, are probably a little bit weaker in power level than for example LeBlanc decks, but you are getting like those decks are basically built around Lulu. She's a very, very, very low-key card. The thing is, in doing this tier list, guys, we're going by multiple metrics at the same time, right? Like I am taking into, you know, competitive viability into account, but design and how they lead to decks and how they like affect deck building is more important, right? She changes the way you build your decks, but a lot of the decks that she works with would actually exist without her. Yeah, maybe C tier is a better place for her. I think I'm pretty happy with that. A champion is gonna get a big amount of bonus points if they make a deck exist that couldn't have existed without them, right? Fizz is really, really interesting. He's been sort of fringe competitive. TF Fizz was kind of the only time where Fizz was really toxic. And like, you know, meta, like super meta, like tier 0. Fizz has spent a lot of time kind of being like in the background. You know, there's always like Feint playing him, and I had like a lot of old Fizz decks that I liked quite a bit. I love his really, really simple design. His level up isn't really as interesting, but he does offer build around strategies that just couldn't really exist without him, like spell heavy kind of elusive style decks. And I think I'm a big enough fan of Fizz. God, this one's actually close. It's like bottom of A or top of B, for me personally. I think the most important thing though is that, like, I mean, he offers a pretty unique build around and does so in a pretty competitive way. His level up is pretty useless, and his champ spell is kind of missing the mark as well. Yeah, that could be one of the big differences between like A and B. That like the champ spell design as well as the level up. I think that's a fair enough point. Misfortune to me personally, oh god, Misfortune is not a champion that I've felt a ton about. She's really cool in scouts, like she kind of single-handedly enables scouts to exist, but and you know, she's obviously ran in Pirate Burn, although she's actually been really underwhelming in Pirate Burn in the past. She has really simple design that doesn't really lead to more interesting deck builds. I would put her in B, straight up. It is a very similar thing to Fizz, which is that in terms of how she affects deck building, it's probably less than Fizz, but at least she has a more cohesive level up that feels impactful, right? Scouts have been kind of like in and out of the meta. You know, they were never like the super dominant thing. I think she's a super solid B for now. Then we've got Rek'Sai, and here's where things get a little bit weird, because I basically can't evaluate Rek'Sai without evaluating Pyke, right? Because Rek'Sai and Pyke were just designed for each other. My queen. Rek'Sai and Pyke were just designed for each other, and there's no way for them to escape each other. And so in terms of evaluating them, we almost just have to evaluate how we feel about Lurk as a deck. I would say for these kinds of champ designs, personally, I'm very happy with them being in C, because I mean, they're not like useless. I do like the idea of these kinds of things existing, and they do have interesting and novel ways to play, which are cool. You have to, you know, think about using them quite a bit. And of course, Pyke has a really, really big bomb that is like, I'm a really big fan of Pyke, and of course Pyke just completely carries Lurk. I think Pyke being better than Rek'Sai actually would make sense just because of the discrepancy between these, but they're both really well designed outside of having like basically zero flexibility. I think both of them being in C makes the most sense, but I'll actually put Pyke ahead of Rek'Sai just because I do like his design better. It's like cooler and it's more unique. Then we've got Riven. Riven's really cool. She's always been kind of like missing the mark of competitive viability. I do like her Blade mini quest. It's a big, you know, it's a cool build around. As much as I like Riven, she's like low B, high C in that area for sure. Like her whole you know, her competitive viability has always been like really lackluster. And while she does have like a cool quest, and while I personally like playing Riven decks, she's not really on the level of some of these others, right? I think personally, I could see her kind of towards the high side of B, honestly. She has been a little bit more underrated. Like, I think she might end up more competitively viable than like MF these days. A little bit trickier to play. I'll put her on the high side of B, actually. That I'm perfectly fine with. All right, Soraka. Now Soraka's source, you know, there's an argument that Soraka and Tom should be evaluated together, the same as Pyke and Rek'Sai. These are a little bit more escapable. I like Tom and Soraka as a deck. They are much more flexible than Rek'Sai and Pyke. You guys are right about that. I do like Tom Soraka as a deck. Like it's cool. I like how it plays. It's always been kind of like a really underrated deck. The fact that she can't really work outside of anything else is a little bit awkward. And the thing about Soraka is that even though she only works in that deck, her standalone design isn't really interesting at all. Whereas when you look at Pyke and Rek'Sai, both of these have interesting ways they play and interesting things they incentivize you to do. And even Tahm Kench does too. But for me, I'm actually going to put Soraka in D, and Tahm Kench will actually go in C. Just because even though they're kind of like a paired couple in the same deck and they just lose massive flexibility points for that, and they literally have to be ran in exactly that way, they've never really been like hitting that competitive mark. But Soraka is just like really kind of like bland design and doesn't really change the way you play. It's just like a draw engine that doesn't do much. Then we've got Zed. Zed is super weird to evaluate on the scale. He's very competitive right now and has been in the past, like the distant past. Like there was basically a year-long gap where Zed wasn't really good. But we're starting to see him play again. He is very simple. You know, he's good design for like a starter champion, and I like how he works with buffs. Overall though, I don't think he does anything, you know, super interesting, and his competitive viability over, you know, most of Runeterra has been a little bit lacking. For me, Zed is actually going to be a little bit on the lower side. I think I would actually put him in the top of C. I know a lot of you guys want to put him in like A or B, but I could see bottom B. Top of C, I think would make the most sense for our boy though. Ashe, God, I honestly don't know how I feel about Ashe, man. I haven't thought of this one. God, where would I even put Ashe? She's always been around. Ashe has kind of been more of a roleplay deck than anything else, to be perfectly honest. She's only ever led to like one deck in the entire history of Runeterra, and it basically hasn't changed. I mean, Spooky Ashe was kind of almost a thing, but I am not on the Ashe chain, guys. Ashe to me is gonna be another C tier. Yeah, no, I'd literally put her behind LeBlanc. I'm not even kidding. She basically doesn't really incentivize like super interesting ways to build or play, and she has always been overrated competitively, but she's never even really had like tier 1 opportunities. And she's literally only led to one build ever. I do like that her level up is like a cool ice arrow thing, like that's adorable, but that's about kind of the only thing that Ashe gets. Like in terms of her viability and in terms of her design, she's really on par with like Lulu and LeBlanc for me. I don't think it's really going to be different there. So Braum is the easiest F tier of my entire life. This is like ridiculous. Now you guys know, if you've been watching me talk about like the Poro deck, you guys know how much I hate Braum. Braum is trash. Braum is useless. He's literally a 4-mana 0/5. He's literally like if Vi just came on the board and just got permanently frostbitten. Like he's got City Breaker as a 1/5. He's got worse stats than City Breaker for a 4-mana card. His regen and challenger are useless. There's no way to commit buffs into him without it being vulnerable. Braum has always been basically a trash card. Horrible card, and not really compelling design. There's no way to build around this card. Like even Poros don't want to run Braum. Poro decks, by the way, I know I like built a recent Poro deck that doesn't run Braum, but Poro decks have been messed around with from time to time, and cutting Braum is not something unique to me. Like good players have not run Braum and Poros since literally the start of the game. Yeah, Braum is straight up F. Would not even begin to compare to Calista or Soraka even. All right, Echo. Man, Echo is sad. I like what he's trying to be. I do like the idea of the parallel convergences and you know the free attacks. He's pretty cool, but to be honest, his first form is really not very interesting. Like the only interesting thing about him is the level up, and he's very, very weak competitively. Some of you guys are gonna be bummed, but this is an easy D for me as well. I'd even put him below Soraka, where I don't think he really adds to the game in a really interesting way. If his first form, if his like pre-level up was more dynamic, if it did more interesting things, I'd be fine with that. But even though I find his level up interesting, it's super weak competitively for a lot of reasons. It only works in like one archetype that he doesn't even uniquely enable. There's literally some players just cut Echo from Zillion PNZ, by the way, is like an actual thing. Echo is just in a really sad state right now. I look forward to, you know, people watching this video a literal year from now, and Echo will be cool, and his, you know, he'll be buffed and he'll be meta, and people will be like, why is Echo D tier? Well, I mean, as of the last several weeks, the only experience we have with Echo is not great at all. All right, Jinx. Woo! We have to get to the Jinx talk. She's all right. Now, I've said a little bit of a hot take, which I think she has been from a ladder standpoint overrated in a decent amount of metas. Personally, I think Jinx, to me, I do like how she kind of like forces you to empty your hand, like she enables these kinds of discard archetypes. Like she's solid. I would put her in high B, probably right. I guess for like the most part above Riven. Yeah, she can be at top of B. I think that's perfectly okay. She hasn't really been, she's been kind of like cut from some discard decks at some points in time, and I think it should have been a few more. And while she does interesting things for decks, it ends up being like another form of aggro, right? She's just like a simple finisher for like a discard deck, and while it's like we can think that discard has like these cute unique play patterns, it's not really doing that much different from a normal aggro deck. It's like sometimes you'll rummage your last two cards away. But Jinx is solid. She's not bad. She's fine. Leona? Oh god, man. What happened to Leona, man? We were all like looking at Leona when Leona came out. She actually looked solid. Like a 4-mana 3/5 that just has like the Arachnoid Sentry effect. It just like stuns a unit. And like she has a level up, and her support cards are all individually solid. Like everything about her looked solid. And Leona ended up with a lot of problems. Daybreak doesn't really end up making that much sense. How crazy is that, by the way? Like Nightfall ended up much more competitive than Daybreak even, which is crazy, which is insane. Leona suffers from lack of champ slots. That's true as well. I think one of her biggest problems is being in Targon. Targon just does not have a lot of cards to support this kind of playstyle of like tempo driven, like early game. And it's a really awkward region for her to be in, right? Like she gets kind of shafted by that, right? You kind of have to run her with Demacia. I mean, I hate to do it, Leona, but you're also gonna be in D tier. I think I can put her above Soraka though, at the very least. All right, Timo. Ooh, Timo. That's an interesting one. So Timo actually has been competitive for quite some time. He was seen as like a meme for a while, but even like early versions of aggro were running Timo in a lot of metas. Timo's, you know, a solid elusive, and he kind of single-handedly leads to Timo Ezreal, kind of like puff cap style deck, which is actually kind of popping. Like in Timo Freljord, which has been a deck for a while now. It's been like 6 months. Very, very solid tournament pick. Pretty low-key ladder pick. It's a little bit tricky to play, but does well at high ranks in general. I'm a fan of Timo. His design is kind of like simple but effective in terms of like redoubling the shrooms. I'm pretty happy with that. For me personally, in terms of like how Timo is affecting decks, I would put him at, God, it's between A and B for me. I think it's got, I've got to go with B. I've got to go with B. I don't think he can be quite an A. It actually is close. I think I like him right under Riven. And as you can see, we've got, you know, a natural kind of like bell curve forming. Maokai. Jesus. Maokai is, I think, the easiest C of my entire life. I like how he impacts deep. I like that he gives you kind of like a unique way to play. And it's even kind of a unique win condition. But even in deep, he's not really that good. Deep's never really been like super competitive. It has made sense in tournament formats a lot more than ladder. It's a super different game, and I am going more by ladder here. But I think Maokai would be, Yeah, probably here, like right under Ashe. Deep is cool, and I like how he has a home in a deck that's at least unique. Like, I'm not gonna put Maokai in D tier. If you look at the D tier cards, these cards have never really made sense, and they've never really had homes. Soraka, I'm kind of balancing out by like having Tom, her counterpart, be in C. But Maokai at least does something more interesting than Soraka, even though he's also only in one deck. Okay, Nocturne. Man, Nocturne's kind of underrated. I think a lot of people actually underrate like Nocturne Unto Dusk Fearsomes, like even not in a Nightfall deck. It's been, I don't know if it would make sense right now, but there was at least a point in time where it was low key and everyone was kind of missing out on it. Nocturne was making sense, and basically just like the Nightfall deck in the same way, but his design isn't really very interesting either. It's really flat, and he hasn't really been competitive. He's been more competitive than anything listed in D tier right now. You know, I mean, Nightfall was a pretty good anti-meta deck for a point of time. It actually had like one of the higher win rates, but I think the fact that it's, oh man, I think his design, and with his like, you know, his whole level up thing and being like just a little too fringe competitive, I actually would probably put him in high D as opposed to low C. That one's kind of close. I think like D, I might want to reserve D to cards that have like never really been competitive, but I mean, Soraka Tom has at least made sense in like some metas. Yeah, I think Nocturne would be like top of D. Renekton? Question marks. You guys are just spamming question marks no matter what I do. I'm gonna give Renekton a tier, and my chat's literally just gonna be all question marks. All right, so we've got Renekton. We can go ahead. Renekton, oh goddamn. For what Renekton is trying to be, it's a well-designed champion. It's just trying to be a kind of like simple kind of bruiser that levels up and like gets bigger. It's not really trying to do anything fancy. Unfortunately, this is my tier list. I'm not going by like objective game design. Objective game design, something like Darius would be well designed because it's a starter card and it's doing what the kind of players that want Darius want to do, but it doesn't create compelling play patterns or deck builds, which is what I'm looking for this tier list. Renekton basically only ever saw one deck. He only ever makes sense in Freljord because his health just runs out otherwise. If you can't give this card a ton of health, then you're better off using vulnerable with quick attack. And this has been true even before the quick attack meta with like Sivir getting buffed. I would even put him probably a little bit under Ashe. I would actually put him a little bit under, yeah, I'd put him right under Ashe. The thing for me is that I think D can be I don't mind listing some things in C if they're like at least had some time of being competitive. I kind of want D to be mostly things that have never really been like ladder staples. And like Nightfall was actually very good on ladder for like a decent stretch of time, like 2 months. I think it is actually fair to move Nocturne to C. I think D or under just wants to be like straight up like basically non-competitive, or like was only ran for very specific reasons. Although I guess the reason Nightfall was good was a bit more specific than Overwhelm being good. Shen is pretty solid. He spent a long time being bad. He's only ever made sense in one deck, which is just Shen Demacia, which is how he's designed. And he was dominant for a very long period of time. Fiora Shen was actually the single deck that was probably most dominant for the longest period of time, seamlessly without a single nerf. In fact, I'm very confident that's true. In fact, I don't think it's even close. That deck was posting tier 1 or high tier 2 stats in every meta consistently for like an 8-month stretch of time. Like it was kind of ridiculous how long that deck was a thing. But Shen has not really, you know, made sense outside of that deck, and he is really flat. I think he's just an easy C. Again, he had, you know, a good stretch of being competitive, but I mean, Ashe was competitive for a long amount of time. I would put him at like closer to the high ranks of C just because he has spent longer being competitive. Like he's a more reliable staple, and he's pretty much better right now. But I don't think I can put him in B. I'm fine with Shen being bottom of B. Okay, do I want to adjust anything else? Let's take a moment before we actually continue. We're gonna do a short intermission. We're gonna do a short intermission because I think we do need to figure out having like now that we're actually looking at these champions and now that we have something, it's kind of hard to do this from the start, but we need to define these tiers. I think like currently I'm very happy with like D and F. I wouldn't change a single card here, except for maybe adding 1 or 2 cards to D, like Nocturne. I think Nocturne and Renekton are kind of like perfect Cs, just like decent cards that both had decent decks that, you know, are a little bit like flat in their designs. I think that if anything, I could see something like Tom going to B. B should be cards that we're more of like a mainstay of like competitive ladder meta, basically, than cards in C, I think. Yeah, I think a lot of cards in B don't really like lead to super interesting deck builds either. I think the biggest difference between C and B is just like competitive viability. I think I would make Ezreal S tier as well, actually. Like the more I like Ezreal has had like meta dominance, and he's a really cool champion that makes you build a deck in a really specific way. I do like Ezreal being an S tier. I'm very happy moving Riven of Jinx here. If Fiora goes down to B, then what even is A? I think I like Fizz in A. He's a little bit awkward. I mean, I think a lot of you guys haven't seen a lot of Fizz decks being meta because they've always had higher win rates than play rates. But Fizz has actually kind of always been good. I think for the most part, I want to like weigh in on like the opposite of flexibility. Basically, champions that lead to decks that kind of couldn't really exist without those champions. Like champions that basically are able to carry decks, right? Because that's something that you'll notice is like literally the opposite of flexibility. That can't really happen if you're taking into account flexibility. And I think one of the most important benchmarks is like how much does this champion carry their deck, right? I think that's something that's been very underrated. But I think moving Ashe to B makes sense. I'm very fine with that. Shen doesn't carry the deck too much. Yeah, she'd probably be like a little bit ahead of that as well. Something like this. All right, you guys know that I'm a sucker for precision. All right, let's make the swap. Okay, this feels good. Sorry about the intermission. We can continue now. Fizz at A. All right, Fizz doesn't carry his decks as much. You guys are right. I think this new framework is going to be important. Shyvana. Okay. Shyvana is... God. I mean, she's a really flat card. Dragons has definitely been somewhat competitive in the past, but it's always been very overrated in terms of like meta stats. It always like posts pretty reliably awful meta stats. There's not a lot of flexibility built in. And while Shyvana is a pretty powerful card, you know, with some of the support cards that came out, Dragon Chow made her a lot better, and her getting Fury, of course, at the same time. And now that she's got the new like Dragon Guard, I think that could be a little bit low key. Dragon Guard is a Demacia card, so you don't have to play Shadow Isles. When people stop playing Shadow Isles and build like better Demacia dragons, it actually could kind of surprise people. I think that she would be definitely somewhere in C tier, probably a little bit on the lower end of C tier. I think like a step above Nocturne, but not honestly that much above. I think that actually I could put her above like Maokai though, probably. I think that's fine. Sivir is really powerful right now. Obviously she was a little bit awkward on release, but off of a buff she is great right now. And you know, I mean, that's what we're evaluating because we're evaluating the current version of the card. And she's honestly like kind of just insane. Her ability to end games is really powerful. Her flip is super impactful. She leads to deck builds that are actually like built around her in some way. And yeah, I mean, I'm actually really happy just like slapping her in A. I can put her like that right above Azir, right below Azir. All right. But yeah, there's honestly not that much to say about Sivir. Like she's super good right now. She hard carries like multiple decks. Tarik is, God, I hate Tarik, man. I think there's something a little awkward about Tarik decks. I want to love Tarik. The reason I hate Tarik is because I love Tarik, right? It's a love-hate relationship. That's why I hate Tarik, because I want to love him, and he feels just so awkward. He really goes against like how Runeterra works. Like you really don't want to be pre-committing your spells. He's basically never really been competitive. You can run him in Demacia with Aegis, which has been close, but basically every time people try that, they remember that running Ionia with Shen is just better and always has been, and at least for the foreseeable future always will be. I think that Tarik is honestly I can say at least his the fact that he clones spells leads to some more interesting deck concepts than some of the other D tier champions. And I really hate to do this to my boy, but I actually will put him in D tier. I will put him at the top of D tier. Okay, Zoe is, man, Zoe's a pretty good card. She's good in Zoe Lee Sin. She can be ran in, you know, a lot of like PNZ Targon versions have run Zoe, and it's been super successful. And she actually has been pretty reliably competitive. I mean, she works with like the Demacia decks as well. She's just a really powerful and flexible card. I would definitely put her in A. I think she might go somewhere like here, around the same level as Fiora. I think she's ahead of Fiora. Victor is close. Victor's a little bit underrated, but not more than a little bit, right? Like Victor, I think like in some Targon PNZ versions, people were running like one Victor sometimes, which was fine in that deck, but that's basically where it ended. It's never really made sense competitively. Victor's close to D. I don't, no, Victor wouldn't be F. I think Victor actually has to be D here. D for sure. It's I actually will put him even above Tarik though. Like Victor's really close. Like his design is cool for sure, but it doesn't really lead to a lot of interesting decks that you can actually build with him. For the most part, you're locked into just like running him with Targon if you actually want to make any use out of his effect, right? Then we get to Yasuo. Oh man, Yasuo. I mean, Yasuo has never really made it. It's always been right around the corner, you know? Like even right now, even as good as Ionia is right now, it's sad because Yasuo has never really made sense. It's always been something that's like a little close. Like even in a lot of Yasuo's own decks, Yasuo was often regarded as like one of the weaker parts. Like you can build like stun gimmick decks that aren't even really running Yasuo. The best Yasuo decks in Runeterra's history have usually just been like Swain decks, which because Yasuo can't actually win the game, so you need Swain to win the game, right? Yasuo is pretty terrible and has kind of like reliably been bad. I think it's bottom of D or top of F. I think F kind of wants to be saved for something like very, very special that doesn't even have like any sort of build around itself. I would put him at the bottom of D personally, as opposed to F. Even though his power level is weak, he at least is doing something unique and trying to support an archetype, which Katarina and Braum aren't doing anything unique. Gangplank. Gangplank is super good and has been reliably good. You can run him in, you know, multiple decks. He has like a good amount of flexibility, and you play around at the plunder trigger. Gangplank is actually like quite a bit more powerful than Sejuani. It kind of seems like his level up trigger should be weaker than Sejuani's when we're comparing them, because they have the same level up requirement, except that you know Sejuani has the freeze and Gangplank has the smash the board, and the freeze looks a lot stronger. But the reason Gangplank has always been more competitive than Sejuani is because it works better with the game plan of the plunder triggers, right? Like when you're plundering every turn, you're usually getting them low and starting to chip out. And those are the kind of games where like, what's the point of freezing their board when they're at like 3 health, right? You want a different kind of thing. I think Gangplank would be a solid like high A tier card, probably above Zoe here. Garen's weird, dude. Garen, I mean, so a very long time ago, Garen did have multiple stretches of being a meta staple. This was pre-Bilgewater in the beta, but that's like, this is the kind of thing that I basically just want to exclude because like the game was so different that long ago. And Garen really doesn't hit much right now. Garen, there's almost no deck that really wants to run him. You can sometimes slot him in as like a one of in Tarik Jarvan kind of stuff, but Garen to me is actually just going to be in D tier. He can be on the upper end of D. I would literally actually put him both below both Victor and Tarik, which probably sounds like I might even put him below Leona. I'm not even joking. Okay, I'll put him above Leona. But yeah, Garen's not great. Heimer. So obviously there was that one Heimer meta where Heimer was kind of terrorizing everything, but Heimer as it is right now is pretty useless. I think it's another pretty solid like D tier champ. I mean, I don't really think the design does anything compelling either. It doesn't really interact like how you're playing with the game in a major way. Again, oh god, would I actually put Heimer in F? It's actually crazy. I like everything, and I like literally everything in D more than I like Heimer. Like Heimer just is such an awkward card that has a really hard time making sense with how Runeterra works as a game. I think I'll put him in D. He can be down here. Like, he's a runnable card. I won't actually put him. I'll put him above Calista. All right, Kindred. Kindred is kind of like basically just the definition of a D. I would say Fs are exclusive to champs that are just actively holding your deck back. Like champs that you don't even play in most hands. Like you guys think Kindred is bad, but she's not on the level of Braum and Katarina. You guys need to understand, if you put Braum and Katarina in your deck, and if your deck is decently refined, like in most games, you don't want to play Braum or Katarina. Like they'll literally sit in your hand and they're not worth playing in most games. Kindred is at least a step above that, right? Like the Ds aren't really good, and Kindred is finding her home here. She can be, oh god, is she better than Echo? That's so sad. Oh, poor Echo. Poor Echo. All right, Lee Sin. Man, where to begin? Lee Sin is pretty unfair. Obviously, there was a point in time where, you know, he got buffed. Lee Sin is just the easiest S tier of my entire life. Probably literal top of S. I mean, he's not even just limited to one deck anymore. He's been just reliably, so he has been a little bit weaker on like the stats, obviously, because, you know, Lee Sin decks are harder to play for a few reasons. But he's even like, he has more flexibility now because people are running stuff like Akshan. He's been basically just king of the meta for a very, very long time. And if you, in the hands of the right player, he is extremely hard to interact with. He carried Ionia on his back for so long. Yeah, he carried Ionia on his back for just an incredible amount of time. I'll actually, yeah, no, he can actually just be at the top of S. Like Lee Sin, for the most part, Lee Sin is a deck is like super powerful, and it's kind of entirely carried by this card, his barriers every turn, and his free win conditions. Like Lee Sin is just insane. All right, Quinn is, oh man, I mean, I guess Quinn would basically have to be on the level of one of the higher C tiers, if anything. I mean, she works with MF, but MF has more flexibility and honestly more power. Like the only reason Quinn is even good is because of MF. MF can be good on her own, and MF can work with Valor, which, you know, the Blinding Assault spell card, which is probably better than MF's interaction with Quinn in that deck. But Quinn does hit that deck, and I mean, has been pretty solid in the past. I think I would put her on the lower end of C. Yeah, probably right under Tom Kench. But she actually has made sense in like an entire archetype for a pretty extended amount of time, and Scouts is still solid right now. They're still playable, right? So it's kind of in the same realm as like Nocturne, Renekton kind of area. A definite C. She wouldn't fit into D. Like D is basically cards that have very, very scarcely actually been playable. Soraka I might actually have to bump up for that reason. I think Soraka would go like bottom of C. Yeah, like D is cards that have never really been like playable outside of just role playing. All right, Swain. Ooh, man, Swain. What a man. So for those of you guys who don't know, I've actually been playing a lot of League of Legends recently. I don't know why. But for those of you guys who have never seen me play League, I literally only ever play Swain. I don't play a lot of Swain in Runeterra because it's a very different playstyle, and I'm usually not as much of a control-y player. But I do like this man. He is very, very solid. He has been a bit overrated in like competitive decks in the past. He's been a lot weaker than I think like the impressions of him for a lot of people. He does lead to, you know, some super interesting kinds of decks. I would put Swain, God, you guys are gonna hate me for this actually. I would put Swain in B tier. Probably like right ahead of Fizz. I think Swain is actually in Runeterra. Swain has actually been in multiple metas a little bit overrated. Swain is not as great right now. All right, then we get to Talia. Since her buffs came in, she's a lot more flexible, or maybe not flexible is the right word. She can be running Talia Thralls, but honestly, we kind of don't count those because she's just a way to clone the landmark. And Talia Malphite's actually not a bad deck. It has, you know, it plays in a really unique way. It actually posts like, you know, tier 2 win rate. Perfectly fine. Talia to me is a pretty easy C. I'm gonna go for a bit of a hot take and actually put her a little bit in like the upper C territory. I think she can be actually right under Renekton. The status right now is actually not that bad. And in that one deck, I mean, most things in C basically only have one deck anyway. In that one deck, she actually has like a really, really important role. Better than Leona? Oh yeah. I mean, Leona has never actually been a deck. Talia Malphite is literally a deck, right? Like, Leona is a card that doesn't really make sense. Talia actively has a very important role in her deck, which is a unique archetype, right? Like, Leona doesn't have a deck. That's the difference between Talia and Leona. So yeah, absolutely, Talia's higher than Leona. Not even close. And Akshan is really, really solid. I'm a big fan of where Akshan is actually hitting some of these decks. He's good in Akshan Lee Sin, which is actually not bad. Akshan Lee Sin is in a meta where you don't really need as much anti-aggro. Akshan Lee Sin is actually gonna be outperforming Lee Sin Targon. Although I don't know if we're headed to a meta like that. Akshan, to me personally, is like straight up top of A. I would even put him ahead here. He's really, really good in, you know, that in a bunch of different ways. He's got crazy amounts of versatility. You can build around him. He's super good. He ends up kind of like, I don't think he's really gonna dominate the meta unless we're counting the infinite combo decks. If we're counting the infinite combo decks, then he's S tier. If we're counting that as a deck instead of just like a bug that they haven't hotfixed yet, then it actually has to be S tier. Honestly, I think that I think I have to. I think I actually have to put Akshan in S tier because of that. Then we got Thresh. So Thresh is a little bit carried just off of just like the Thresh Nasus interaction. Thresh has never really made much sense in the past. He's seen like here or there, but it's always been just a little bit awkward. It's literally just Thresh Nasus. I don't want anything in S to be a literal like only one deck can run it, and that's why like Lee Sin might have not been an S if it wasn't for like Lee Sin Shurima actually potentially being quite playable. I think Thresh for me personally is gonna have to be just in C for sure. It does C play in, you know, Thresh Nasus, and Thresh Nasus is a very good deck. I think Thresh would actually be on the bottom end of C, probably below Nocturne. Yeah, literally. Thresh requires like very, very specific deck to make him work. And obviously, like, Thresh Nasus is a good deck, and that is one good deck that does happen to use Thresh, but there's a lot of good decks that use cards in C, right? Like, Leblanc Sivir right now is just as good as Thresh Nasus, and they use Leblanc. All right, then we've got Trundle. Man, when Trundle came out and was a 4/6, he was literally kind of busted. That was kind of crazy. So, I mean, Trundle doesn't really make sense right now. He was good in, you know, when Lissandra Trundle control Watchers was a thing, and he was good when Field Rush was a thing. He is really good in like those archetype staples. I think Thresh is a pretty easy B just off the merit that he kind of doesn't really have a deck right now. If you look at everything else in A, they at least have kind of a deck right now, although, okay, Fiora might have to slide down a little bit. Yeah, I'm sorry. But yeah, no, I mean, I think Trundle is a pretty easy B. Super solid. He would probably be on the upper end here. He actually might be like top of B. Yeah, let's put him top of B. All right, Vi. God, Vi. Ooh, where to begin? So when the champion launched, he had 5 health, in addition to, of course, Tough, which was sort of broken. It was definitely broken at the time just because of how it interfaced with some decks at the time. I can tell you right now, that was basically a coincidence. In a different meta, like, Vi could have been fine. Did I say he? I meant she. In a different meta, Vi could have been like fine instead of being broken. They ended up nerfing her 1 health, and I think since then the champ has been, in my opinion, and this is, I guess, a bit of a hot take, but basically unplayable. And again, she's a decent champion. She doesn't have a deck building cost, so she'll have higher win rates than someone like Yasuo, but she doesn't really lead to any sort of deck build that actually makes sense. Like, the decks that run Vi are going to be winning without her. I would put her basically just like bottom of D. I guess I would put her 1 step above Calista, but to me, these champions are both kind of representing the same thing. Vi Zoe was a thing for a bit. I could definitely bump her because of that. Yeah, sure. I mean, she's probably closer to the high end of D than the low end of D. That I'll agree with. So Viego is kind of interesting. There's a lot of people that like Viego in, you know, Shurima builds with Shadow Owls as a replacement to, you know, Thresh and Nasus styles. You can cut Thresh, you can cut both Thresh and Nasus and run Viego. There's a lot of ways to run that. It's kind of unclear like whether that will be the future of that kind of archetype, but it is a very powerful archetype, and Viego is a little bit trickier to play. I think Viego to me is actually going to be on the low end of A. I think he's solid. I do think he was being underrated for a while. I don't think I would put him lower than this. Viego's not a bad champion. He doesn't have as much raw flexibility, but he does do a lot for a specific kind of deck. Like he's a very, very integral part of that kind of deck. Like I wouldn't put him lower than A. Absolutely. Vlad. Man. So Vlad has basically been a deck for one pretty brief period of time with like Vlad's Scargrounds kind of thing. And you know, I'm sure we'll see some amount of resurgence for that. And again, we have to weigh in like how valuable the champ is in their own deck. Vlad, I don't think it's not even like the most essential thing in that deck, which is pretty sad. Like in a lot of games, like Vlad is better than Tarik, but not by that much, right? he would be he would be in the D category. I don't think he'd be an F. Like he at least has a little bit of home. If anything, Calista might be an F, because I still don't think there's a single deck that you'd actually run Calista in. I don't know. I might be biased. I hate Calista. Vlad was being cut in some versions even. Yeah, Vlad was being cut in some versions even. The fact that Vlad was getting cut from his own deck in some of the older versions especially is really, really not a good sign for our boy Vlad. Like it's pretty crazy. I mean, I still can't put him on the level of Braum and Katarina. F to me is like a really, really special a really, really special score. I would put him at the bottom of D. Like he at least makes sense in an archetype that is doing something fairly unique. And even if he's like trimmable from that deck, I mean, people have cut Yasuo from Yasuo decks too. It's kind of the same thing. Anivia. So Anivia has basically never been good. There was one point in time where like people thought that Braum Anivia was good. It never was. That was never a thing. But the copium on that lasted a while. People were playing that for like 2 weeks before they realized it wasn't good, which is pretty funny. Yeah, no, that actually lasted a crazy amount of time. I think Anivia has never really led to a unique build of Shadow Elves Freljord that has made any amount of sense whatsoever. I don't think there's anything that this champion is doing. It's basically just like it takes its own deck and makes it weaker. I'm debating whether it's actually the third F here. I could literally put it lower than Vlad. Like she's so bad. Again, Anivia is something that, I mean, Shadow Owl's Freljord is a good color combination, and she forces you into Shadow Owls, so she'll always make some sense in the same way that other cards that force you into good color combinations are kind of nice, but she's basically never correct in her own deck, right? Shadow Owl's Freljord has so many different ways of having finishers. Darius is solid though. Like Darius isn't bad. I would put Darius probably, could be like upper D, low C, I think. F for follower. Darius is actually my favorite follower. Darius has been pretty good. He's getting a little bit edged out by some of the more like competitive Overwhelm cards. He used to be a lot better back in the day, and there were multiple metas that were dominated by Darius decks. Like he's not a bad card. He's very meta dependent against like stuff like hard removal. But even literally like 2 months ago, people are climbing with like Azir Darius. He really can't be as bad as some of the others, but I think he would be on like the lowest end of C, I think. Yeah, he's not amazing. Then we've got Hecarim. So Hecarim, for those of you guys who didn't play in the beta, Hecarim was literally just the first ever sort of like terror of the meta in Runeterra. Hecarim was literally the first card that people were baby raging about like needing a nerf, and this lasted for a few months, which is pretty funny to imagine because you don't really see Hecarim anymore. Old Hecarim, yeah, old Hecarim was something else. I think he would actually be a little bit on like the higher C. I would probably put him, I'd probably put him right behind like Tom Kenshir in C or something like that. All right, Jarvan's nuts right now off of the buff. Jarvan's actually crazy. The difference between the fourth trigger and the third trigger actually was absolutely huge. Jarvan is just straight up one of the best champions in the game right now, and Demacia ends up being like not super flexible as a region. So, you know, yeah, I get he's a little bit limited there, but Jarvan is like a really solid A tier. I think I would put him, yeah, and like, I mean, he's reliably posting like really, really good win rates. That's, I think I'd put him literally right here. Probably just ahead of Gangplank. I'm not joking, by the way. Jarvan's actually insane right now. Put him behind like Irelia and TF, but yeah, no, Jarvan's literally nuts. Okay, then we've got Karma. All right, I might be a little biased on this one. You guys know how I felt about Karma in the past. Karma Ezreal does happen to be a good deck right now. But Karma has spent a long time being kind of like a fan favorite roleplay card. Has never really made sense. This mythical idea of getting to turn 10 has always been a very, very funny meme. She has been good in the past, and Karma Ezreal is a very good deck in the hands of a good player. I wouldn't be edgy enough to put her below A. She is solid, but I would put her right under Gangplank here. She is pretty powerful, a bit more like meta dependent. All right, Diana. Man, what happened to you, Diana? It's so sad. I mean, the Pale Cascade nerf hurts so much. I mean, she basically has to be on the same level as Nocturne. I don't think there's a way around that. I legitimately think Nocturne is better than Diana right now, by the way, with more flexibility. So it would be at like the very bottom of C. Like I would actually put her under Darius. But I don't think I'd put her in D though. Would I? Oh God. She just got a skin too. Listen, it's sad. It's sad. Put her in D so she can be with Leona. I think she actually will be like top of D. Like even Nocturne feels a bit more flexible. And Nightfall has just gotten so shafted by like the Stalking Shadows nerf. Then we've got Lux. I think Lux might have to be the third F. I mean, she does something interesting in deck building, but it's a little too. Lux is pretty terrible. Lux is pretty awful, especially with the speed of the game getting up. Like I could see her being bottom D, but I actually think she'll join the others in F. I don't think Lux makes any sense at all. There was like arguably a 1 month period where like Karma Lux was a thing, but that was literally at the start of the game, and even that is a deck that I don't think needed to get nerfed to get fizzled out. And that's basically the only thing Lux has ever had. Like I think Lux, I mean, she's at the top of F if that's a consolation. The biggest problem with Lux is, well, there's a few. She doesn't really end the game very quickly, and for being a 6 mana card, you know, it takes like a very, very slow card pool for that to make sense. And we're not gonna have a card pool like that again. Like you guys have to remember, like when Lux Karma was a thing, and it was kind of a thing for basically a month, it was abusing some broken cards at the time, like Ranger stuff, and Radiant Guardian was a 5/5 back then. There was a lot of things going on that are just not the case anymore, but the speed of the game was very significantly slower. Yeah, no, Lux is awful. She kind of like intentionally makes your deck horrible. Nasus. So Nasus is, you know, obviously pretty good. He's got the one deck. It's literally the only deck. But he's been good for months now. Does well even like posts coming off some of the nerfs with some of the atrocity stuff. He's pretty comparable to Viego, where I think Viego actually does have more flexibility. I would put Nasus below Viego actually. I think Viego would be a few steps above Nasus. You know, the jury's not out on whether like Viego will be better than Nasus in that deck long term. I think it likely will be, although I don't know when the win rate stats are actually going to reflect that. But I do think that wherever Viego is, he'll have to be like a couple positions above Nasus, because Viego's actually more flexible than Nasus. Zoe, I could actually move between them. All right, Sejuani. Sejuani's a weird card. People ran her in, you know, PNZ for all your like Timo Sejuani instead of Timo Ezreal, or Ezreal Sejuani for a little bit until they realized that she kind of blows. Sejuani is such an awkward card. She's run an Overwhelm for just like having the Overwhelm, and she has a bit more flexibility. Like she was ran an Ashe Dex for a little bit because she says the word freeze on her. Sejuani is not great. She would basically just be the very bottom of B, I think. I could even see her actually getting overtaken by some of the top C things. Like she's actually really awkward right now. She doesn't really offer that much. Actually, I have to bump Leblanc up. I think Leblanc is actually really important in multiple powerful decks right now. Like LeBlanc actually does want to come up to B while I'm at it, because LeBlanc is definitely better than Sejuani for sure. Like not even close. Okay, we've got Malphite. Malphite's not bad. Malphite basically spawns an entire archetype. The buff to him was really important. He has like 10 triggers now instead of 12, right? Or something like that. Pretty sure that happened while I was away. Malphite's really not bad. I think he's actually pretty underrated. He carries an entire deck pretty well. He gives you payoff. He's kind of like if Yasuo wasn't a bad card, right? Like Malphite and Yasuo both kind of force you to run like a lot of awkward cards with a big deck building cost, but Malphite presses a button that can win you the game, and Yasuo has no such button, right? Like there's a big difference between these two. Like Malphite is much better than Yasuo. He's actually, yeah, I would put him ahead of Renekton as well. And again, keep in mind, we're rating the champion, not the deck, right? Like overall might be a better deck than Talia Malphite, but like Malphite has a more important presence in his deck. So we've got Nautilus, another kind of like deep card. And Nautilus, unlike Maokai, is actually essential to deep. Some deep versions literally trim down or sometimes entirely cut Maokai, which is pretty funny. That took a very specific meta for people to cut Maokai completely. But Nautilus is definitely more essential for deep than Maokai. Nautilus kind of like is the core of the entire deck, and deep has kind of reliably been solid, right? Like deep has, it's only really achieved like tier 2 win rates like pretty recently, but it spent a long time being tier 3. I think I would put him in kind of like I could actually see him in low B, which is gonna sound like a raging hot take, but deep as a deck literally can't exist without him, and he's actually very the deck is pretty underrated right now, or at least last time I checked. It's either high C or low B. I think high C is a little bit better. I'll put him actually ahead of Lulu. I think he's pretty underrated actually. Tryndamere, man, so Tryndamere has never really done very much as a card. He saw play in Field of Rush decks for, you know, a very singular reason, and that's about it, right? So he'll be low D. He's not literally in F, but I think he'll be basically just a step above Anivia. I think right now there's less reason than ever to be thinking out Tryndamere. He could actually he could be ahead of like some of these. Like the fact that he at least has a home in like what he interacts with in Field of Rush is pretty important. I'll put him right here. All right, Azir. God, Azir's so weird. Super hard card to evaluate. It's really impactful in its own deck, and I mean it does carry an entire like slow grindy archetype. It's been super good in the past. I think it's an easy A for Azir. I'd probably put him like a little bit like, you know, not in some of like the nuts versions of A's. I think he would be probably ahead of Lissandra right now after the Lissandra nerfs, but yeah, pretty good. I might actually put him a little bit ahead of Nasus, but Azir has a lot more flexibility and has a larger impact on his deck. Okay, maybe right behind Nasus. Elise. God, whatever happened to Elise? I remember a long period of time when Elise was kind of ran in like every sort of like, even like slow decks were running Elise. Like even the control-y decks were running Elise just because she was good. Like Elise was such a good card for so long. She hasn't seen play outside of literally Spider's aggro for like, since when? I guess TF Gohard was running Elise. That was the last time she was seen outside of literally Spider's aggro. But yeah, I mean, with champ slots constricting and with 2-drops getting more competitive, she really has fallen off in a pretty incredibly significant way, right? I think she's all right. I could actually see her being more of a B than an A. I think she would be like the tippy top of B though. I think she would be like the tippy top of B. Lucian. I think Lucian's good. I think Lucian's actually just been like underrated for a while. I think Lucian is an insane card in Shark Chariot Lucian, which I think has been a really underrated deck ever since Plaza came out, if like built and played correctly. What was he running? Lucian Azir as well, which kind of made sense before Irelia Azir was a thing. Lucian is one of the best champions in the game that has felt like he hasn't really reliably had like a real home, right? It's super weird. I think I would have to put him on something like the lower end of A here. He's pretty solid. I think I might actually have to bump TF a little bit down just for his current status. TF has to be like closer to like this. Lucian I think would be kind of like in the same realm of things. I think he's probably a step above Lissandra right now. Zillion is actually not as bad as people like to meme about, and I would know because I mean I like Zillion bad memes. Like we all love Zillion bad memes. He's quite a bit better than Echo, which is really sad. In fact, I think that's what made a lot of people realize that Zilean wasn't that bad. When Echo came out and people ran them together and people were like, wow, this Echo card makes this Zilean card look pretty good all of a sudden. How did that happen? D, he's not that useless. Oh, hell no, guys. This card doesn't exist in D tier. He's not even close. He would be somewhere like this. Although, I mean, I can move Thresh like that. I mean, he's at least good in his one deck. Aphelios, God, whatever happened to this champion? What does he even do now? They made him 3 health again. Did they? Did they not? I can't keep track. They made his guns 3 mana and then everyone stopped caring. I think I think I've seen Aphelios literally 1 time on ladder since they made his guns cost 3 mana. Donger's out for Aphelios, dude. I mean, I don't miss him at all. Not even close. I wouldn't put him in F. He's not at the level of these, but he is not good. Like, he would be between Yasuo and Vlad, I think. Yeah, I think this is a pretty fair position for Aphelios. Like, kind of like middle lower D, if that makes sense. He's not great. He's not great. He can't flip. Yeah, like you kind of have to build a deck around him, and he's just like really slow and clunky. So yeah, no, Aphelios is definitely no good right now. I think, yeah, Tryndamere will be ahead of him. I think I will actually make a couple final changes. I'll bump her a little bit lower here. But yeah, this is it. This is our champ tier list. All right, what do you guys think? What tier list are we doing next? I'm having a lot of fun doing these. These are great. Yeah. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. This is a pretty accurate reflection. But again, you guys have to keep in mind, depending on your metrics, you're going to end up with a very different tier list, which is why it's important to very clearly define your metrics. And I should have done a better job doing that at the start and throughout. I don't really like plan things out. I just like click my start streaming button. Like I focus on like building decks and, you know, trying to make sure that you guys have the best decks. And I've never really like thought about like things that, you know, would be good content, which sounds kind of ridiculous. And honestly, it is. Like, probably is good to, you know, think about that kind of thing. Yeah, it's this is the kind of thing that I think is fun for me to do. It's fun for a lot of you guys to watch, and it's a right kind of content that like it's fun to watch on Twitch and YouTube. Tomorrow we'll do the emote tier list.